Hello, everyone. My name is Hanina. I'm the CEO of AI Cure. We were actually awarded Best Startup Success Story at the Iconics yesterday, which was fun. But thank you very much for having me today. I'll try to battle the echo and speak in a less aggressive or intense manner. I'll also try to make do with the screen, which is a little dim, but we'll do our best. AI Cure stands for Artificial Intelligence Cure, and we are motivated at AI Cure to improve both statistical power in clinical research and health outcomes in population health. And it's not a trivial thing to do, to be able to do that, because there are not many parameters in healthcare that will really allow you to influence either of those two variables. But the one thing that does ring true is the parameter around patient behavior. And the idea of patient behavior is a very complex one, but it's extremely interesting. By way of background, AI Cure to date has received over $7 million of funding from the National Institutes of Health from 3 institutes and centers. NCAT's National Center for Advancing Translational Science, which is dedicated to accelerating drug development time and quality. NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is dedicated to solving the addiction problem, as well as NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, across multiple therapeutic areas. Last year, we closed a $12 million Series A that was led by New Leaf Venture Partners, which is one of the top life science healthcare investors in the world, and it was with the participation of Dr. Boris Nikolic, who was the former chief scientific and technology advisor to Bill Gates. And he actually sat about 30% of his time at the Gates Foundation assessing new technologies that would have global health outcomes impact. So getting someone like that to validate what we're doing is really, really important. My background, I've been in healthcare technology for about 17 years. I've been a subject matter expert to the National Institutes of Health on medication adherence technologies. And I was also a visiting fellow of electronic health at Imperial College in London. So my bread and butter, and the thing I'm most passionate about, is impacting health outcomes and improving human health. That's what drives me. So the problem of medication adherence is a $400 billion problem, believe it or not. When patients just don't take the medication, it impacts everyone in the healthcare system. It's kind of like driving speed down the highway. Single variable in driving, namely speed or how you swerve, can be directly correlated to the risk of a car accident or death. In the same way, medication adherence is linked in that similar manner across every therapeutic area in healthcare linked to health outcomes, i.e. hospitalizations or death, or in a clinical trial to statistical power. So it's a major problem. And unfortunately, in most of these instances, either the care provider or the clinical researcher has no idea if the patient is actually taking the medication. It's a little insane. So hands up in the audience, anyone who takes medication or knows people that have taken medication? Almost everybody, right? Because it's a tool set that physicians use. If you don't take the medication, it won't work. But if you don't take the medication and it doesn't work and you're trying to measure that in a clinical trial, that's a huge problem. And patient behavior is really interesting. It's really confusing and it's really difficult to understand. In fact, in some cultures, they say that the reason why I've gained weight is because I'm in a happy marriage. That's true. So what you can't see on the graph is sloping lines that go down, and what it is, it's across diabetes, cholesterol, hypertension, depression, other therapeutic areas. Over 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, patient behavior goes down. So people take less and less of their medication. And there are many reasons why that happens. They get bored, they experience side effects, they don't believe the medication is working. And there are disastrous consequences if that happens, to the point that about 100,000 people die each year because they're not taking the medication in the US. It's a tragedy. And almost 30% of clinical trials fail because patients are not taking the medication. It's insane. That's about $30 to $40 billion a year just flushed down the toilet because they don't have a controlled experimental design. And what's tragic about that is there are so many of these medications that don't get to market. And if they do get to market, then about 20% actually cause some kind of serious adverse event that either kills them or causes some kind of horrible adverse event. 20% of FDA-approved drugs. And part of that reason is because they're not properly controlled settings to ensure that patients are actually taking the medication for the experimental design. So, in medicine, there is something called directly observed therapy, which is when a nurse or a healthcare worker or a study coordinator in a research environment will actually observe a patient taking the medication. It's pretty intensive. The nurse has to travel to the patient, or the patient has to travel to the nurse, but it's reserved where the economic or clinical burden of non-adherence, medication non-adherence, is really high. It's very labor-intensive. It's really inconvenient because of travel time, and it's expensive. So what AI Cure does is we've automated each of those steps through an AI platform, computer vision platform. So when a nurse greets a patient, they say, "Hi, Adam, nice to see you. Time to take your 3 capsules. Please take them. Here's a glass of water. And I'm going to do a manual inspection that you've actually taken the medication and do an empty mouth check." Seems a little radical, but it's considered the gold standard in medicine. It's extremely effective. In fact, the World Health Organization uses it as the #1 tool to combat tuberculosis, which kills tens of millions of people every year in the US. So how does it work? Again, little things, so apologies. In healthcare, there's huge regulatory burdens, but we at AI Cure believe that that's actually a huge competitive advantage. To create a regulatory framework and build technology based on that regulatory framework that allows you to automate directly observed therapy is no small feat. The system performs facial recognition to confirm who's taking the medication. We can identify duplicate enrollment, which occurs in patients who are trying to be paid twice or get double the amount of medication and abuse the medication. And we're using a deep learning neural net for those purposes. We identify the medication based on shape, color markings, as well as the packaging or the pill bottle, which allows you to deal with polypharmacy. And in fact, we have prototypes for inhalers, injectables, and pretty much any self-administration process you can imagine. We confirm ingestion, so we actually monitor the patient putting the medication in their mouth, and we do an empty mouth check for high-risk patients. Again, that process is done in every single inpatient clinical trial, and it's performed in most inpatient high-risk patient populations. The NIH has funded a whole host of monitoring systems that continuously track the face around the field of view and try to identify any kind of fraudulent activities that a patient may perform. Those fraudulent activities or incorrect usage data points are immediately flagged on our dashboards. No video review is needed. We can provision this as an app or as a device in the event that the patient doesn't have a phone. And what's so wonderful is we've tested this on $8 smartphone devices available at Best Buy. The cost of both provisioning of devices and the data plans is going down significantly. There are real-time analytics and a whole host of patient engagement features. Now, behavior modification is really difficult. That's the field we're in. In fact, Goldman Sachs estimates that in healthcare, the behavior modification market is so large in terms of cost savings that can be achieved, they've actually given a number to it that doesn't contain any numbers. They've said it's indefinitely large. So for Goldman Sachs not to be able to put a number to something, that's probably a commercial market that you want to go into. But with behavior modification, it's very difficult to understand human nature. If you ask someone to self-report their driving speed down the highway to the police, and then you pay them, I guarantee you're going to have a negative ROI. That's what human behavior is. In fact, for any behavior modification tool, you need to have an accurate platform to be able to confirm the behavior. Once you have that accuracy initiated, you can then create a spoke model around the accurate hub. The spokes can consist of micro-incentives, psychoeducational content, intervention by the care provider, or automated intervention. Psychoeducational content is really interesting because if you've just been discharged from the hospital and you go, screw this, I'm not going to take my medication for a couple of weeks. And then you receive a notification that says, you have a 61.7% chance of being hospitalized because you discontinued your anticoagulants. What's your incentive to take them? It's pretty powerful, actually getting that data. So we believe that this platform is a democratization of healthcare. Where suddenly, if you were to be discharged in a stroke population, which we're publishing data on, and you had a stroke, you're discharged from the hospital, you're on your own, you're cognitively impaired, so it's difficult to follow instructions. And you could have a $150,000 nurse following you for 3 months. Or you could have nothing, which happens in most cases, and then you visit your doctor once a month. Or you could have an AI Cure type platform monitoring you along the way during the treatment journey. That becomes a very, very powerful use case. Not for the generally well, but for the highest risk of patients, the 5% that cost 50% of all US healthcare costs. So we believe this platform is kind of like an airbag or a seatbelt or an intelligent medical assistant that travels with the patient along the patient journey. You would not put an airbag on a bicycle. Although some smartass told me yesterday that there are actually airbags for people around the neck. So I have to use a different metaphor. So we're all here in this conference because AI gives the opportunity to do things that we couldn't do before, but it's really just a tool set in order to capture data, the D word. And so what's so important with any kind of healthcare process or procedure you do is that you validate it. And so we actually presented this data 2 days ago at ISCTM, which is an international clinical research conference, and it made me emotional. Honestly, like I actually felt both pride, but also almost tears seeing this data. And what this data is it's a schizophrenia study we did. Schizophrenic patients who have hallucinations, cognitive impairment, variability. If you have a hospitalization event with a schizophrenic patient, it can cost between $50,000 and $100,000 per patient. It costs US healthcare huge amounts in this single therapeutic area. And what we demonstrated was, when you monitor patients with AI Cure, you'll get 91% blood concentration levels of the medication over 6 months. When you visit them 3 times a week, you get 71%. Now think about that. A nurse visiting a human being, a patient, 3 times a week, is outperformed by 25% with an artificial intelligence platform. Now why is that significant? Because you can correlate not only the statistical impact it has in a clinical trial program, but you can also forward project the likely reduction in hospitalizations caused from these increases, because most patients don't have continuity of care. They leave the hospital, they leave their physician's office, and then there's no follow-up. So again, this platform creates an awesome ability to suddenly have a touch point for a patient. It's really, really incredible. In fact, how you frame this technology not only builds in regulatory issues and health economics issues, but it also builds in psychological issues. How you frame the technology to the patient is really critical, because if you say this is a Big Brother type application, it's going to watch you in your pajamas, right? Probably not such a great way of doing it. But if you were to say, okay, in a clinical trial, you're here to improve medicine and improve the science, improve the medications that get to the market, and the data we capture will affect the lives of potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, based on your cooperation and provision of this data. And by the way, this technology will provide you with clear guidance in what you need to do according to the experimental design. If you need assistance, immediately you can press one button and get connected to the sites, the clinics. Suddenly that becomes an assistive technology. If you explain to someone who's been discharged from the hospital that now they have this assistive technology, because it's not for the generally well, it's for sick people, and this assistive technology will reduce the risk that they're hospitalized, again, it's an incredible tool. The question is, how generalizable is this kind of platform? Because suddenly, if you're able to modify patient behavior, you're able to validate approach, which we're doing against blood levels, and you're able to create a clear economic argument, then the question is, where else does it work? So we've deployed this in CNS, cardiovascular, infectious disease, across elderly patients, polypharmacy, cognitively impaired, a broad range of ages, very technical literacy, high and low-cost therapies, multilingual, multiple languages, high-risk and high-functioning patients. And we're getting incredible results. Because what AI offers to healthcare is a highly diverse platform that can adapt to patient behavior. Our technology will actually provide guidance in both audio instructions as well as visual prompts. It works for any types of transient patient populations, migrant patient populations. It really is, it has the ability to significantly impact healthcare. 4 graphs. You can't see them very well, but this is really quite important because to understand behavior in any kind of level of detail will allow you to act on that behavior. Patient A, you will see some scatters of blue dots, pretty good patient. Patient B, suddenly after a few months, has high variability in the time of dosing. Patient C actually stops taking the medication halfway through treatment. And patient D takes 2-week dosing holidays, so they stop taking the medication for 2 weeks or longer. Each of these patterns has a profound impact in the efficacy and safety profile of the medications they're taking. And you can link their data directly to how they're doing. And suddenly, this platform provides insight into that type of patient behavior, and it's just the beginning. Because we're collecting one of the largest video asset bases by therapeutic area and longitudinal data in the world. So, this technology can have a validated, quantifiable impact on human health. Our vision by 2020 is to accelerate drug development by 1 million days and prevent 1 million hospitalizations from occurring. That's our mission. Thank you. So the way direct laser therapy works is a nurse will say hello, they'll tell you what your dose is, they'll provide instructions, they'll hand you the medication, they'll ask you to put the medication in your mouth, drink a glass of water, and then they'll perform an empty mouth inspection. So we've taken that clinical standard and we've automated each of those steps. Yes. Yes. It's a great question. Yes. So the question is, how do cognitively impaired patients use the technology? Well, what's really critical about any technology is that you understand the patient population. You can't be arrogant enough to say, I know every single therapeutic area, because the psychology of patients varies quite significantly across different patient populations. The way we built the technology is, number one, to be interactive to the user. So if the patient does something incorrectly, both audio and visual prompts will kick in to provide additional guidances on a step-by-step function. Number two, we provide minimal touch points with the actual device. They get an alarm, they either press start or skip. And that means that pretty much any age group, according to our National Institutes of Health usability studies, can use the technology. So the benefit of starting with an approach that gets funding by the NIH is that you have to justify your reason for being, and then you have to put in really rigorous experimental designs to make sure that your technology can be generalizable. So in the very early days of our existence, we conducted huge numbers of usability studies across different socioeconomic patients with one-way mirrors, observing patients using the technology. In fact, in 2010, we spoke to a very large global nonprofit about the idea of automating directly observed therapy for different patient populations, and they said they did not believe that smartphones would be adopted globally. So perception of technology is changing. We've had usability studies around elderly patients, specifically, who have given feedback that, in the case of one gentleman, he said, he was 84 years old, he said, wow, I know someone who's really old who'd be able to benefit from this technology. So the perception of technology is changing. We're getting pushback from people saying patients with serious mental illness will not be able to adapt to the technology. And what we found is those are erroneous assumptions. Because when you look at the adoption rate of smartphone technology by different patient populations, they're representative of general consumers across the US. And then when you look at adoption in smartphone technology outside of the US, it's pretty dramatic in terms of how quickly that's happening. Okay, thank you very much.